Hi, this is Ken with Letus, and this video will be about how to use the Letus Helix app to change the configuration on the Helix. It's version 1.33. The first thing I want to do is come in here to the settings on your iOS device, and I want to kind of come down here to the actual Letus Helix. Okay. And you can see that there are some settings in here. You'll never need to use cellular data on this because you're connecting to the Helix via Wi-Fi. You can see the app version is 1.33 for this video. And then you have several controls down here. The first one is send balancing data to Letus. Now this one is only for if you use the balancing assistant, which is new in this version. And it's only going to work with encoded motors anyway. So in general, we would recommend that you have this, turn this off, and we're only going to turn this on if you have some kind of troubleshooting thing, if I ask you to do that during the troubleshooting call, okay? RC receiver type, you can see that you select this and you can choose between, you don't know what it is, it's an AR6100E, so if you have one of the, you got your Helix or it was originally made before November 2015, you can check that, or you can check the satellite receiver. Obviously, most of them at this point will have the satellite receiver in them. Okay. Next one is if you're going to use the claw center hurricane wheels, you can just turn this on, and this will provide you with channel numbers when you're setting up your RC settings. Superior customer service is always checked here. Okay. Next, I'm going to come down and come up on settings. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on. You have to make sure that the Helix is turned on and that you're getting a Wi-Fi signal here. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. And you can see that this particular one is Letus Helix 194 is what I want to select. And then I'm going to go ahead and come out to the main app. And I've come down to Letus Helix. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and hit the connect button. And you'll see it connects. And up at the top, you can kind of see that it gives you a firmware version up there on the right. 2.63B0 is the one I'm using with encoders. So if you have encoders, it'll show up there. You also have the profile numbers up there too, telling you what profile it's on. So you can see we're on profile 1 because that's the highlighted one, right? You can actually go through the various profiles by hitting the various buttons here. And right below that, you can see that the profile description in gray will change as I do that. Okay? If you want to actually change the profile in the Helix, you have to hit the profile number that you want and then hit the right button down below. We'll get to that later. Okay? Now I want to start off and talk a little bit about this eye up here at the upper right-hand corner, the information button. And this one will show you how it gives you a little bit of data on your Helix, basically just on the app as far as what to do in this particular page, okay, or this particular screen. Okay. Let's look down at the bottom here. You have the read button, and what this does is it reads all of the profile data in from the Helix. Now, your app will do this when you first connect to it. So when you hit the connect button and it's red, the first thing it does is it reads in the firmware version data, right? And whether or not it has encoders, that kind of stuff. And then once it does that, then it goes ahead and reads in all the profile data. Now, once in a while, you might see something that says, instead of or connected, it might say reading data, and it'll be like a purple button. And in that case, what's happened is you've made a connection successfully, but you haven't actually read in all the profile data. And so we've set that up so that it still will not function, and the program won't function because you don't have all your profile data read in, and that could potentially create corruption of your profiles, which we don't want to happen. So if that does happen, just hit the reading data button again, or the just hit the reading data button again, the connect button, and it should keep trying to load that in. Okay, probably means that you don't have a great connection to your helix. Maybe you're too far away, or there's something interfering, something like that. Next thing I want to cover here is just the general idea, right? Is on this app, it's meant to be a little simpler than the simple BGC GUI for the Macintosh, the Mac OS, or for your Windows computer. So it does not have everything in it. The intention is that it's a good tool to be on set with. You can make some basic changes. You can, do some things like that. Do some real basic troubleshooting. If you have any kind of serious troubleshooting, then I would recommend getting the full program on the computer. Or if you're trying to upgrade your firmware, you can't do that on this app. Okay, so the first thing I want to cover here is this. You'll notice here that I have a number of options, okay, in this menu, and you can scroll up and down. Now, your options may not look exactly the same as mine. For instance, if you have a double helix, you may have an option on top of this. If you don't have encoders, you won't have an encoders tab at the bottom. So it does adjust to what you have in your helix, okay? So, set PID and power, okay? So the more information button basically just talks a little bit about balancing, gives you some recommendations on that. Set power. Let's say you really have no idea what to put down for the power settings, okay? So maybe I'll come in here and I'll hit 3 to 6 pounds, and then I can hit the right button down at the bottom, or I can adjust these manually and get it a little more precise to what I want. So let's say you have something a little over 3 to 6 pounds. Then, maybe you want to, it's kind of like on the border of 3 to 6 and 6 to 10. And so you kind of go halfway in between these two, okay? Now keep in mind that these settings, the app really doesn't have a way of distinguishing between a standard helix and a helix junior. So if you are using a helix junior, the settings that are used when you change the weight here might be a little bit low for your helix. Because the standard helix motors are a little bit stouter. They get a little more power to them. Okay, so you can go ahead here, hit this, like 3 to 6, and then you can hit the right button. Now, let's say you try this out. Okay, you tried out your helix. You decide, no, that's not right. I want to go back. You can actually just hit the restore button, and this button will go back to whatever you had whatever settings you had when you entered the screen. Keep in mind that if you leave this screen, the restore button, it only looks at when you last entered this screen. So for instance, if you change this down to, let's say you change this to 130, and then we leave the screen, we say, oh wait, I'm not done. Come back here, you hit the restore button, it won't go back to anything before that, okay? You can, however, leave and go to the information button, and you'll be fine doing that. So now let's go and that write and restore, those write and restore buttons are on almost every screen in the app. You'll notice that nothing changes on the helix until you hit the right button. Right means communicate those changes to the helix. So PID settings. If you have the PID settings here, you have the current PID values will always show up on top, and then you have some other options here, okay? Now the options that you have may change. You may not have this. The options that I have here, because you might have a different model. For instance, let's say you don't have an encoded helix like I do. Your options may be different. Okay, so don't be concerned about that. I try to adjust these a little bit depending on which type of helix you have, whether it's encoded or non-encoded. So the intention of this is you can go ahead, use this picker, right? Choose the one that you want to try, hit right, try it out, see if you like it. If not, go to the next one, hit right, try it out, and of course you can always just go back to restore to get back to your original PID values. Now I'd recommend hitting restore unless you find one you really like before you leave the screen, of course, because otherwise you'll lose your original PID values. Okay. Manual adjustment. If you want to manually adjust these, let's say you've developed a little bit more ability, you're a little more of an advanced user, and you want to raise your D value a little bit or raise or lower the power a little bit, you can do that in the screen. Just select the particular axis that you want to look at and adjust these and hit right. Okay? And that's about it for this set PID and power. Let's see. Well, we never really went through save to library. So let's talk about that. Let's say you have a profile and you think, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I either want this profile to be in my settings or I'm sorry, I want to permanently remember this so that I can come back and use it with this camera or whatever. Or let's say I want to send this to a friend. You can do that by going to Save to Library there on the bottom. Okay, and you can type in a name for your profile, like Ken's favorite profile. And you can save that, and it will save that to the library, and you can kind of see down here the profile library that you'll see it when we cover that too. Okay, motors on off, of course, just turns the motors on or off, which of course you can do just by hitting the menu button once on the Helix itself. Okay, next screen I want to cover is follow mode. So the top two switches you're generally not going to touch. Very few people are actually going to turn the follow mode off on pan or tilt or roll. Roll is generally off because you want to maintain the horizon when you're shooting anyway, right? If you turn these off, like pan off, you'll notice that the pan does not follow your motions. It tries to track in one general direction. Okay, roll starts to follow at tilt angle of 45 degrees. This slider goes up or down. If you put this at 90, then the Helix will maintain the horizon all the way down to looking at an object straight down, and it should do that. That's my preferred configuration, is actually 90 degrees. If you have, there might be some instances where when you tilt down to say 60 or so, you want this to kind of start rolling with you and moving with you on the roll axis. And so you may decide you want to do that. Adjust pan follow here in the center of the screen. So now this is low speed versus high speed, right? We have some defaults, and you can use these buttons up top. Don't feel like you need to, though. They're certainly not gospel. This speed here you can use to decide how responsive you want your Helix to be. If you want it to track with you and be very responsive, maybe you want it high. I wouldn't recommend going higher than maybe 90 or 100 would be the top ever. If you get too fast, what can happen is your camera can overshoot. So it'll actually, you do a quick, like a whip pan or something like that, it gets to its location to where the angle you want it, and it might overshoot a little bit. So I would recommend keeping that probably 90 or 100 or lower. 30 might be the lowest you might ever have that. If you want it to be super, super smooth and very kind of regal looking, you could do it with 30. Expo basically says how much do you want to ease in these moves so that there's not hard edges to your moves. So that usually is somewhere between 20 if you want it super responsive and just coming starting immediately, or maybe as high as 60 or 70 if you really want it smoothed out and all the edges are very gentle. LPF you can pretty much leave where it is. That doesn't get used much. And deadband, one seems to work pretty well, although occasionally you might want to raise that a little bit. But I actually find that one works pretty well, and essentially what this is it's the number of degrees from center that the helix frame or the handles can move before the camera actually starts to respond. So let's say, for instance, you are shooting one object for a long period of time, and you don't want to really get off that. You don't want the camera to move at all. You could set that at, say, 3, 4, 5, something like that, and then that would give you a little bit of hand motion without it actually moving the camera at all. That's about it for this screen. Just so you know, deadband and expo do apply to all axes. So it's not actually just the pan axis. The speed, however, the other two, the speed and the LPF, apply just to pan on this screen. Follow speed, you'll almost never use this for roll because it's not generally used in follow mode anyway. Tilt, you can, 30 is pretty good. Occasionally, if you're looking for something that's a little less responsive, a little more gentle, or you have a very large setup that's kind of at the upper end of what the Helix can do, you can lower that just a little bit, maybe down to 20 or 22 or 25, something like that. And that might help you accommodate a larger load where you're not taxing the motors quite as much if you're really pushing the limits of the Helix. Euler angles down at the bottom. For the most part, unless you're doing some kind of a remote head setup or something very strange like that, you're really only going to use either vertical shooting mode, which allows you to shoot straight up or straight down, or the continuous roll mode. Now, continuous roll mode will allow you to do a 360 on the roll axis. Note that you can't have both of these at any given time. But you can choose between them. And of course, you have the right and restore button at the bottom of the screen. Okay. Let's go on to joystick and RC settings. If you're using a joystick, then you can come in here, select one of these, select the row that you want to change. Let's say you want to change the pan, and you want this to be the up and down motion on the joystick. Up and down are defined by where the cord, I'm assuming that when I say up and down, where the cord comes out of it, out of the joystick, the actual control, that I considered the downward direction. So, and then you can choose the RC here for, say, a Spectrum controller or joystick or no input. Okay. When you do this, of course, you want to choose the option and then select somewhere outside this table in order to use that option. Okay. So let's say I want to do that up there. And of course, as always, you have to hit the right button to get that to work. You can affect the pan speed here if you want to for joystick or RC. Generally, joystick, I like to set around 15 or so. But if you want to get it to move faster or slower, you can do that. Unfortunately, you cannot change the direction of the joystick or the RC motion. If it's reversed from what you prefer, you'll have to use the full simple BGC GUI in order to change that. Down at the bottom, you can see RC and joystick trim settings. This is only if you are, you really aren't going to use this much. Generally, if you have an RC system, you're going to trim it on the RC system. If you have a joystick, you can trim it here. You'll notice that there's a bind RC button at the bottom. So if you have a Spectrum satellite receiver in your Helix, you got yours after November 2015, you can use this bind RC to put that receiver in bind mode. Now, the thing is that when you do this, this way of doing it is not as reliable, so I generally recommend doing another option, and I'll show you that in a minute here. Okay. Orientation calibration. You can do a camera, a frame gyro, or camera calibration. You can calibrate either the accelerometer or the gyro on this screen by hitting the appropriate button. You can also do a correction for the home position. In general, unless you're using the firmware version 2.43, you're not going to go ahead and do this correct for the home position. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. In fact, at some point in the future, I may end up taking that out of the app altogether. Menu button. So you can turn on or off confirmation beeps. So if you're a wedding videographer, you may not want confirmation beeps, or in the midst of your shooting, or well, I guess a lot of people probably wouldn't want them. But so you can turn them on or off here. Each of these options below basically says one click is one click of the menu button on the Helix. So I can hit this, and you'll see the options here. Normally, the normal option is motors are toggled between the on and off. Okay, so you can use profile 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reset controller. That's normally long press. Set tilt angles of my hand. That option is if you do that, and you can see this is normally 5 clicks of the menu button. And essentially what it does is it puts the Helix into a special mode for 2 or 3 seconds. It beeps for a very short period of time, and you can use that period of time in order to set the correct home position for the roll axis. So if your roll axis is about 1 degree or 2 or 3 off, you can actually use set tilt angle by hand. In this case, you would use it for 5 clicks of the menu button. Gives you 2 or 3 seconds to move it where you want it, and then you basically put it in that position, the correct position, real quickly, and then at the end of that, it locks that in as the home position. These are obvious. Calibrate gyro, you can see. Bind RC receiver. This is normally the method that I would use to put the Helix in the binding mode, the receiver in the Helix for binding mode, and then you would put your RC radio or whatever you have that you're trying to bind to that receiver in bind mode as well at the same time. They would find each other and bind. So time-lapse motion is a way of setting this up. It's a relatively new feature. Feel free to give us a call if you have any questions about that. It's not fully functional in the app yet, so you may have to use the simple BGC GUI to complete that. And that's pretty much it. I mean, all of these can come into whatever position you want. Okay, and I'll restore these. Well, it looks like there was a little bit of a problem there, so I might have to look at that. Okay, so we're reconnected here. Profile library. So here you have a profile library which will contain the profiles that you have in your Helix. So it actually stores these in the profile library on the iOS device, your iPhone, your iPad. And so what you'll notice here, I have several of these, right? I'm going to go ahead and delete these. So these profiles here wouldn't normally show up. And this one here you can see is the one that I saved on the main screen, or saved to library, right? So I'm going to delete all these using the delete button, right? And then if I hit the update library button, you'll notice what comes up, notice they all say ENC at the end. Well, that's because I am connected to an encoded Helix. And so these profiles are all of the profiles that we have stored in the app for encoded Helixes. So they're kind of default profiles. And they'll only show up if you hit the update library button. Okay? So, and of course, once you do this, then you have a few different options, right? You can hit the open button, and open will open this up in the app so you can look at it. Of course, it doesn't write it to the Helix yet, but it just opens it so you can kind of look at the settings and see if this is what you want. You can hit the write to Helix, which essentially opens it into the app and then writes it to the Helix. It's kind of a shortcut for doing that. Or you can hit the email profile button. And what this does is, you hit that, and then it will, you can type in an email address here and send this to a buddy who has a similar setup as you, and then of course they can come in and come in and use it that way. I won't show you the other way, or basically receiving these profiles, but essentially what happens is, if you come down here, you'll see that you have a .letus profile file that's attached. And as you can see in the instructions, you open this inside the email program that is the default for your iOS device, right? You can't use like a Google Mail or something like that. So you open that up, you click on the profile, it says, where do you want to save it to or copy it to? You select the Letus Helix app, and it will actually dump you straight into, I'm going to delete this draft, okay? It will actually dump you straight into the Save to Library screen here. And then they can go ahead and save it into their Helix. Now, one thing to keep in mind is we are still connected by Wi-Fi to the Helix. So in order to actually send this, you usually will have to get out of or quit that Wi-Fi connection, go into the mail app so that it says, oh, it must be time to send any kinds of things that are in my outbox. And that should take care of that. Now I have system checks here, and we have a couple of different system checks. One of them is a general system check. So I have you can see this, right? And so it will, basically I want my Helix to be level. So the roll axis in the correct position, roll pan and tilt are all in the correct position. And that the motors should be turned off. If you forget to turn your motors off, it might say that you have a gyro issue here. Then hit the OK button, and it will tell you, is there a problem with your physical setup or calibration or current profile? And I'll actually just give you a little example of this here. I'm going to go ahead and run this general system check again. I've turned my camera upside down. I'm going to go ahead and run this again, and you'll see that now there's a red dot there saying there's a problem. Sometimes you'll see the yellow dot too if there's a possible problem or a very minor issue. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this line with the disclosure indicator, and it says camera may be upside down. And then on the bottom it says recommendations. Please make sure that your BNC SDI connector is facing up when the camera is right side up, if you have a standard Helix, or that the 2-pin LEMO connectors are facing up when the camera is right side up for Helix Junior. And this happens because occasionally someone who's learning to use the Helix will mount their camera upside down. So the system check will do quite a number of checks here. And you can kind of see down here some of the checks it'll do, checking your IMUs, your sensors, bad calibrations, motor disabled, bad settings of number of types. There's also here an RC function check, and it operates very similarly. You can see this here. Right? Now the roll balance check is a little different here. And what it does is, go ahead and hit that. Now if you do not have if you don't have encoded motors, you won't even have a roll balance check show up, okay? So I'm going to turn on my Helix, and oops, actually I messed up the profile here doing this. But if I hit this, if I hit OK, essentially what will happen is it will rotate the roll axis 60 degrees to the right, 60 to the left, 60 to the right, and back up to center. and then it will evaluate my balance. It'll tell me, okay, you need to move your camera up or to the left or to the right, and that kind of thing. And this is where that setting from the iOS settings, if you went into the Letus Helix section of the iOS settings, it says send balance data Letus. This is where it would actually do that. Okay? That's it for there. One other thing too, just going back into the profile library, your email profile button may not show up if you do not have an email account that is set up on this app. So you have to have set up on this iOS device. Okay. Encoders here, and again, if you don't have an encoded Helix, this won't show up. You can turn on the pan encoder, roll encoder, tilt encoder. You can calibrate the electric field, calibrate offset. Generally, I recommend you not do this unless you really know what you're doing, because you can mess up your Helix pretty badly. If you have an encoded Helix and you see that these number values in gray are zeros, that's a sign that you've lost your encoder calibration, and so you need to do something about that. You know, give us a call, tech support. We can kind of run you through fixing that up. Okay. Now on the encoders, you can also, there's a save to library button, and this is a little different. What this is it saves your encoder calibration. Okay. So if if there's some kind of a problem, you save it. When you first start this app, when you first get into this app, you'll notice that the load from library button will be grayed out. And once you hit the save to library and you save these, then the load from library button will turn blue again so that you can select it. So the general idea here is once you get it, or when you get it early on, you can save the encoder calibration and then you can load it in from the library. If there's any kind of problem with that in calibration, you can always load it back. And that's about it for the Helix. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. I'm always available for any kind of questions or help with tech support at letus.cs on Skype. And I hope you're having a great day and that you're enjoying using your Helix. Thanks.